Welcome back to another episode of Lost in the Farmer's Market. Now this episode is shot in the lab because, well, this specimen isn't quite ready to go out. However, it's in bloom, which prompted a reshoot. So here's a redo. Now, the plant before you is called Coleus Scutellarioides. And boy is that a mouthful. I really had to consult a pronunciation key to make sure I was saying that one right after the whorehound mistake. Well, anyway, Coleus comes from Greek, from the word Coleus with a K, C-O-L-E-O-S, or Coleon, K-O-L-E-O-N, which means sheep. Though, looking at it, I'm not really seeing where they got the idea for sheep. Now, the word also may come from the word Colei, C-O-L-E-I, which is the name of a leather wine sack that contain up to 20 amphorae, which is about 120 modern gallons. It's a lot of wine. But its potential use could mean testicles or the scrotum, the latter being a ruder context, of course, because inevitably, what language doesn't devolve to slang? Am I right? Look at the English language. Things have changed. I digress on that point. Coleus is native to the tropical and subtropical areas of Asia and northern Australia. It is a herbaceous perennial in USDA zones 10 through 11, but for most of our usage, we consider it an annual. Pure and simple as that. Now, it prefers a soil pH of 7.0 plus, which means alkaline. Pretty much, which is not bad. It doesn't seem to have an upper limit, but then again, I haven't tested that, so we'll just go with that. Its exposure is partial to full shade, which is nice, because look at the colors. This plant is quite colorful, and that's actually what Coleus are famed for, but, as you can see, as I said before, it is also in bloom, which, ironically, was something that they were selecting for way back when, but now, not so much. Now, its height can be anywhere from 6 inches to 3 feet, and its width can be the same, and that depends on the species and the individual cultivar. There are bigger cultivars, and there are smaller cultivars. There are ones that are bred to be trailing, there are ones that are bred to be upright and erect. There's a fair amount of range in this species. Coleus is about as versatile as you are, as your preferences are. This one, for instance, has these interesting fingers on the leaves and a dark central coloration with chartreuse green tips, which is quite unusual. It caught my eye at the growing tray, definitely. What's interesting here is that Coleus was first brought to Europe through Java in 1851 by the Dutch. It's one of the few plants that tolerates deep shade, and actually its color is so-so in deep shade, but it's at its best in partial. Now, it was formerly called Solenostemon Scutellarioides in the early 2000s, after being called Coleus hybrids before that. At one point, it was also Plectranthus Scutellarioides. That's a word I don't want to have to say 3 times fast. I really don't want to have to say that specific epithet 3 times fast. It's a tongue crusher. Forget Twister, it's a tongue crusher. Anyway, the name has changed a few times, and actually if you look at the Wikipedia page, it's got a metric, I'm going to cuss here, a metric fuckload of names, because its name has changed and people have disagreed on its origins and yada yada yada. Then there's the hybrids, and the varieties, and the specific names. Like this variety reminds me of a variety that was available in the late 1990s to the early 2000s called Inky Fingers, one of the first fingery frilled types, and now you see them all the time, but not Inky Fingers, which was almost all black. Or really dark purple, let's be honest here. Anyway, it is not edible, unfortunately. Unlike its cousin, Cuban oregano, which is Coleus amboicus, or its other cousin, Swedish ivy, which is Plectranthus verticillatus. It is not edible. It contains diterpene colonol O, and has what's considered a low poison toxicity. Basically, it's not edible, but you could eat it if you're desperate, but the puking and the vomiting isn't worth it, so you definitely want to keep it away from your pets. Fair. Constant contact with the leaves and the sap can cause dermatitis, which can be aggravated by the exposure to sunlight. So there is that too. For a pretty plant, I mean, it had to have some kind of chemical defenses, and there they are. Well, that's not all. As I said, it's not dog or cat safe. Unfortunately, they're going to get the worst end of the vomiting and the diarrhea, so if your golden retriever eats mulch, which you know who you are out there. You know exactly who you are. You might want to plant this in the back or hanging baskets or something where they can't reach. Now, here's another catch. Cultivars rarely come true from seed, because most of these plants are bred by cuttings. What you would do is you'd normally take a cutting from, see this stem tip here? Down to about down here somewhere. A good 3-inch to 5-inch cutting. You'd remove 75% of the leaves, leaving the ones near the tip. If it's got a flower tip, that's not ideal. You'd want one that isn't actively flowering, like this one here. And you stick it in a glass of water and wait 2 to 3 weeks, and it'll grow roots on its own. Now, the seeds themselves, if you get them, and sometimes they have them through the burping line, you'll see them on the seed racks in spring in the flowers. There's usually only one type, and it's a random assortment because the cultivars don't come true, and when you get that, you never quite know what you're going to get. Well, the seeds need light to germinate, which means they're surface sow only, like a lot of mints, which I forgot to mention. Coleus is in the mint family. Square stems. So it's a trooper for the mint family. It's not a really edible one, and when you bust one open, you can kind of smell a weak minty scent to it. So there's that. Beyond that, a Coleus is really easy to take care of. The key is regular watering. You know, whenever it's dry, it will wilt dramatically and let you know when it needs water. If it's wilting dramatically in the middle of the day and its soil is moist, that's heat wilt, and it should recover once it's out of the lazer-sun. It does have a few diseases, most of which are viral bacterial diseases spread by a bug called derps. You can control those with a pyrethrum-based spray, an insecticidal soap. Manual control is hard because derps bounce around and move a lot. So you're going to have to coat the whole plant, surface, underside, and you may even have to go for hydrogen peroxide treatment, which, by the way, hydrogen peroxide treatment, this works for derp larvae, derp eggs and/or larvae that are in the soil, or any other thing that is in the soil. So it's 1 part hydrogen peroxide to something like, I think it's 4 parts water. You're diluting it at some point, and you pour this in the water, and it's going to sizzle. And what it's doing is the hydrogen peroxide is killing off, unfortunately, some soil organisms, but it's killing fungus gnat larvae, which can be a problem with these plants because of their lack of moisture. But it'll kill any other unwanted insect larvae in the soil. It will not stop fire ants, but it'll get rid of the big nuisances that you get in houseplants, which is always a bonus. So, that covers the wonderful world of Coleus in a nutshell. A really big nutshell. And I'm just going to say this as closing for this episode. You should have this plant in your garden. I mean, there's a color to suit your fancy, there's a pattern to suit your fancy, it's a win-win proposition. The best part is, at the end of the season, if it's in a pot like this one is, you bring it in and it's a houseplant that tolerates a fair range of temperatures. What it does not tolerate is freezing. It does not tolerate constant cold drafts. Though, and this is a little bit of history about me, Coleus was the first plant I successfully cloned. Just like coneflower was the first perennial I successfully grew from seed, Coleus was the first plant I successfully cloned way back in the 90s. And my cuttings came from a very large specimen that was in a dry cleaners up the block from the apartments that my family lived in. And that was one of those basic green with red heart inner line, it was basically green leaves with a reddish inner lining, and the leaves were more heart-shaped than this. And, you can get some mutations with these plants when you do cuttings like that. But anyway, it was the first plant that I really started to understand how I was actually creating duplicates of something without seeds. I didn't know it was cloning at the time, but let's face it, agriculture done been cloning for forever. So, Dolly the sheep, that's cute. When are you geneticists going to catch up someday? Anyway, cheekiness aside, I hope you liked this episode. If you have any comments or questions, please put them down in the comment section. If you haven't already, please subscribe, hit the like button, and if you have any critique on this episode, please leave it. I'd love to hear it. There's new episodes on the blog, of course. We're doing photo-heavy episodes because there's just critters everywhere, and it's summer. What do you expect? Anyway, as always, folks, keep them growing, and thank you for watching.